Are you guys good to go?
I'm ready to go. Yeah.
Are you guys good to go?
Woo.
Yeah. Well, welcome to Why Films Go Under the Radar. I'm Alix Catherine. I'm going to be your moderator for today. And before we jump into the panel, I always like to let the panelists introduce themselves. So I'm going to start all the way at the far end, and we'll work our way this way.
Oh, okay.
No pressure.
Nepotism.
Hi, everyone. I know, nepotism. Derek says nepotism because Alex is my wife. That's not, like, that wasn't a joke. Or okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Patrick Gallett, also known as JPG. I am a pop culture educator and consultant. I own the consultancy firm Intermyth, where we help marginalized communities launch their own little part of the content creation space.
Nice.
Beautiful. Nice. Aloha, everybody. Can I get an aloha?
Aloha!
All right, I love it. I'm Thomas Craig. I'm originally from Hawaii. I was a pilot, survived a plane crash, then became a pop culture podcaster. So if it makes no sense to you, it makes even less sense to me. But yeah, I do a couple different podcasts. The first one is this one, The Joystick Show. Started it with my high school friends. It's a weekly pop culture podcast where we review and talk about new comics, video games, movies, and shows. And it's really focused around comedy. And then the second one is a weekly challenge show where me and my co-host challenge each other back and forth to different movies and shows, and we must accept the challenge. So that's me.
Hi, I'm Derick McDuff, host of the Underrated Movie Podcast. So that is a podcast where, as the name might imply, we discuss films that are underrated, underappreciated, or ones that have gone under the radar and passed most people by. So yeah, every other Monday, I talk about a different underrated movie. All of these lovely people have been guests on the show, as well as some people in the audience have also been guests on the show, so thanks for coming by, guys. But yeah, so this is my first Comic-Con panel, so I'm pretty excited to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Olivia Kendrick. I am a professional sound editor for film and TV. I've worked on things like Transformers and Star Trek, and that's a very behind-the-scenes role. Where you probably see me most is I ramble about sound design on TikTok. I have about 65,000 followers over there, and I just kind of ramble about all subtle flex. I just talk about, sound design in films and TV shows that I think need to be, heard and appreciated. And yeah, also my first Comic-Con panel. Glad to be here.
Hi everyone, my name is Kurosh Jozavi, and when I'm not guesting on Derek's podcast, Morbin Out about Morbius or various other films, I have my own show, the KJP Show, where I talk about indie games and game development and celebrating and elevating it when I can. So I produce that. I'm the main show host, and I have some guests when I can from the gaming industry. So happy to be here.
And I am the host of The Welcome Party. It's a Monday night Twitch stream on Perception Studio where we invite everybody in our audience to experience something in pop culture with us, and then we literally hang out and talk about it and build a community. So lots of fun and lots of community building.
Woo!
Yeah. Now, this panel was put together by Derek. It is your podcast. So I'm going to have you start us off with defining an underrated film, because I want to make sure we're all on the same page as we're having this conversation.
Yeah, this is interesting because this is the question that I probably get asked the most by people when I give them like my elevator pitch to a podcast. They're like, what's underrated? And that's why I kind of include what's underappreciated, what's gone under the radar, because some things might be underrated by the critics. This one, it did really well financially, but people didn't see it at the box office. It might be the opposite. Something where, like one movie that I talked about was Silence. That's a movie that people who like movies like Silence, but it did not do very, nobody saw that movie. So it really could be a few different things, or it could be all of the above, which is what the first movie I ever covered on Underrated was, which was Speed Racer, which is a movie that everyone seemed to hate, but I've always written really hard for, and that's why it had to be our first ever episode. So there's a lot of different things. It's a nebulous thing, and so there's a lot of crossover in the different Venn diagram of what counts as underrated. I think it's just what is in your heart as underrated.
I did want to add to this as well. I was trying to like scientifically define this. Okay, so is everybody familiar with like the 4 quadrants, like the XY axis, all that stuff? Okay, cool. Okay, so on one side it's going to be critical reception, and the other side of it is going to be audience acceptance. Right, okay. Because it could be like highly like critically praised, but like nobody saw it, right?
Yeah.
So that's a good way in order to try and define it at this point. So yeah, so try to think about like the 4 quadrant stuff. Because if we're going to talk about film, if one of us doesn't bring up the 4 quadrant like formula and idea, like I think we failed.
Yeah. Can we get that drawn on like a chalkboard?
Yes.
Everyone look under your seats. You have a graphing calculator.
The quiz starts now.
Now, Kurosh,
Yes.
since you were, giving the audience a hard time, I'm going to give you a hard time.
Oh, no. Okay.
And ask you, what are the qualifiers that you look for in an underrated film?
I think that's okay. That's a good question. Nice. I would say in the vein, I'm very similar to Derick in that there's numerous ways in which you could look at it. I think for me, the qualifiers would be at least the people in my social circle or those that I see online in the current, whatever the time period may be, whether it be now or in the past, there's not enough being spoken about it, or it's not being in the conversations often enough when it comes to quality films, or just if it's for instance Speed Racer, if they're talking about visually stunning films and it's not mentioned, I'm like, why is this not being appreciated in this conversation or being brought up? I think that's one of the key elements to it, I would say. So,
Austin, what about you?
I feel like for me, I need a film to kind of resonate with me. I kind of describe it as a film that feels like I've been knocked upside the head with a frying pan, Something that really just strikes me. And oftentimes when it comes to like that underrated status, when that resonance, kind of hits me so hard, I want to talk about it with everyone, And when I bring it to people and I'm like, yeah, this film, it was everything. And they're like, I've never even heard of that, And so for me, that kind of underrated status comes from, like that passion, that resonance, that way it spoke to me versus the like how many other people have even gotten in conversation with it, I guess.
And Thomas, you're going to be the last one for this question. What qualifiers are you looking for in an underrated film?
I'm so glad you repeated the question. I was like, whoa.
My ADHD, by the time 2 people have answered, I would have not known what it was,
I
too.
was like, wait, what is this about? No. So I think for me, in preparation for this, I was listening to a lot of underrated. And if like this answer doesn't sell you, then I'm sorry, Derick. But one thing that kept coming up for me was timing and expectation. So it really, like there could be a movie that's fast, like amazing, it works so well now, but when it came out, it just kind of caught people off guard and it was just kind of, ahead of its time. So I think there's that element. And then I think the expectation side of it, it's like coming from a marketing background before I was a pilot, you're trying to sell somebody on the story, right? And you're trying to sell them on like what you think they need to capture so that they can buy into it. And I think expectations, especially when movies are marketed, don't always meet what the director and creators had in mind and then the way people are perceiving it. So I don't know, I guess those are the characteristics for me that have to deal with an underrated movie, and hopefully it catches you at some point. I don't know. Usually I feel like it's early adopters is maybe what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I think Thomas, some to your point is like, and a little bit to what you said, Austin, of like, you see something in a movie that just speaks to you or that you found love in, and maybe they either didn't know it was there or they didn't see it when they saw it, and you want to present that to them. You want to explain what the joy was in this that maybe they didn't see or they didn't even know of, and you're ultimately trying to share that that passion, that love of a film that you found, and put it out there more and celebrate it with other people.
Yeah.
I'm mad you used joy before I did. It's like in our name.
I'm trying to market and help you.
Thank you. I'll take it.
And I will add that I love that whenever I, tell people about the show, I always love to ask them, well, what's your underrated movie? And the just dearth of answers that I get. They're like, it couldn't be anything from like, a high class Scorsese movie, like I mentioned, or like I was at a wedding last week and I asked somebody and they're like, SWAT is super underrated. I'm like, cool. I have a letterbox list of stuff I need to watch, or like before we were the show, I was talking with somebody and he was like, have you seen Splice? You need to cover that on underrated. So it could be anything. I love that there's so many different definitions for what an underrated movie can be.
Derek, that's my next question.
See?
There you go.
It's a perfect segue. Now, before I actually ask the question of what is the underrated film you swear by, I just want to check how many people would have had Speed Racer as one of their answers. On Speed Racer? Okay. I'm taking that one off the table because it's already come up a lot. So you have to answer with something that's not Speed Racer.
Or Splice, presumably.
Are we allowed to bring up ones that we have talked with
Yes.
on the podcast?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Because then you can plug your podcast.
Okay, yeah, sure.
I'm with it. Do you want to start us off?
One of my favorite films of all time, it was the first episode I ever did with you, is Inside Llewyn Davis, which is a Coen Brothers film.
Yeah.
And if any other filmmaker had made that film, it would have been their best, but because it's the Coens, it always kind of falls to the wayside. It never enters the conversation. And it's a film that makes me feel a very specific way that I can't quite describe other than I just need to like stare at a wall by myself for an hour. But that type of resonance, there's a reason why I, kind of put it at the top of my list of the underrated films. It speaks so directly to some deep part of me. And also Oscar Isaac is incredible in it.
The way he loves his cat makes me want to cuddle my cat.
Oh yeah.
I had an interesting answer to this one, I think. But sometimes a film goes underrated because of the nature of what's happening around it externally. And I absolutely love Kubo and the Two Strings.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
But it also came out the same weekend Captain America the Winter Soldier came out. And just by, because normal people will only go see one film for that weekend. All of us here on this panel probably going to see all those films that weekend.
We got to use that AMC A-list,
That's
man.
exactly
Back then it was just Movie Pass. For yeah.
Glorious days.
Nicole Kidman perfected it.
I think it was one of those films that it was so good, but it suffered from the vast popularity of everything that was coming out around it. So not only like intrinsically can a film be underrated, but like extrinsically, like there are external factors that kind of force it to be underrated because nobody else had the capacity or time or whatever in order to check it out at the same time.
I feel the need to jump in at this point because that same weekend another movie came out that was also very underrated at that time. The Raid. Redemption. It was a martial arts film.
Yes!
And I remember going to the theater being like, okay, what are we seeing this weekend? We were all kind of in the same of like, oh, let's see more of the Winter Soldier and stuff. And I think one or two of us were like, what's this one? And we looked at it briefly and on a whim, just pure whim, just decided to see this movie. If no one's heard of it, it's this, I believe, an Indonesian film?
Yeah,
Is that correct?
it's based in Jakarta.
Yes, thank you. And it's essentially like this slum area, and there's a tall apartment building, and there's a boss at the bad guy at the top, and the SWAT unit is going in trying to get to the top. Essentially, it's like Donkey Kong Mario in a movie with martial arts.
It's the one film where I was like, the bad guy should have won.
Yeah, no, but
Just
it is-
martial arts wise.
From the moment it began, it was a nonstop. It's a very violent film, so please keep that in mind if you ever consider it. But if you're into that and you're into the martial arts, it does not stop. I've never felt adrenaline to that degree. And I had bought multiple copies of this film just to lend it to people and be like, if you like it, keep it. Like, then you pay it
They
forward,
need
please.
to be paying you for all of the advertising you've been doing.
I have never had a friend not be at least enjoying the film, let alone be like, okay, maybe I should keep it. And that was like, that same weekend, it's funny you mentioned that weekend. I was like, I very much remember later seeing Winter Soldier and be like, it's good. It's not the Raid.
Unless Marvel is in the room.
Yeah, I'm
I love Captain America. Yeah, I think for me, it's a movie that Derek also reviewed, and I was like, I want to do this one, and you're like, yeah, it's taken. I was like, yeah. But Big Fish.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Big Fish, like, I don't know, it was transformative for me. Yeah, I remember, dating a new girl, and this was before we were just like trying to hold hands. I was nervous about that. And then she was trying to cuddle up with me, and I'm watching Big Fish, and I was like, okay, can you just hold on a second? Like, I need to watch this movie. And I loved it. I think there's something about this tale and the adventure and this kid who believes they're more, and maybe it spoke to me as somebody who was from Hawaii, wanting to get off the rock. And I don't know, still to this day, I love that movie, and I think it's severely underrated.
That is a great movie, and I'll just add that that was a really personal movie for me because my dad is also a big bombastic storyteller. He had a stroke a few years back, and so like just the connection that the guy had with his dad was really powerful and personal. I liked all the answers you guys would get. My underrated movie, other than Speed Racer, because that's off limits, I'll give is Stardust. Not the David Bowie one, but
that was on my list.
Yeah, the 2007 version, and that movie is actually part of the reason why Underrated even exists, because for a while I had been wanting to do a movie podcast. I never knew what the hook was. And one day I was just, in like 2018 or something, I was watching Netflix and I was like, you know what? Stardust came up and I started watching it and I was like, this is it. This is the podcast. This is because I was in a group chat and like somebody was like, what are you doing? Oh, I'm watching Stardust. It's a really underrated movie. And then underrated. Like, I can't even hear that word anymore. It doesn't mean anything to me. But that was like the start of it.
Bolt of inspiration from the sky.
From the
struck
Stardust.
you.
Charlie Cox. It's amazing. Definitely check it out if you haven't seen it already.
There's so many people in that film.
Yeah, a lot of people who would go on to be superheroes.
Now that we kind of have an insight on our panel, I'm going to ask the question of, what do underrated films tell you about the type of person that loves it? Now that you put yourself out there.
Yeah, that was a point that like I wanted to kind of touch on when we were kind of defining underrated films, is that like that watching a film is such a conversation. You can come back to a film multiple times and feel like you've gotten something different out of it, because of, you've accumulated different life experiences, you're at different points in your lives, but I think it speaks so much to the person about what films speak to them, what stories speak to them, what characters speak to them. It can even be something where, you watch a film and it resonates with you and you're like, why is this hitting so hard? And then you revisit it a few years later and you're like, oh, okay, I just hadn't figured that out yet,
Yeah, I think, sorry, I was about to answer and then I realized like what was even the question. It was, what did they mean to different people? So yeah, like I mentioned, sometimes people will say, oh, I like SWAT. So the person who answered SWAT, I was like, okay, this person likes just kind of like action movies from the aughts, and, SWAT, popular movie. I guess some people liked it, but it's kind of looked down on. So are you the kind of person, so if you give an answer like that, where it's a movie that a lot of people know, people look down on, but it's just a dumb, fun action movie, it's like, okay, you like that, and I respect that. Or are you going to be the kind of person who's more artsy and, is going to be like, for example, Inside Llewyn Davis. Yep. I'm like, okay, Austin, she knows her stuff. She's somebody who like understands like deep filmography. So you really can tell a lot about a person by the answer they give. And it might not be necessarily one or two of those things. It might be like, you can like SWAT and Inside Llewyn Davis. You can think of them both. I've done, almost 150 episodes now, and I've done a lot of artsy-fartsy stuff, but I also did Reign of Fire, which rules, by the way. Matthew McConaughey jumps at a dragon with an axe. This guy gets it.
I'm feeling so called out over here because I chose Spice World for our upcoming movie.
Yes!
So excited for that.
Obviously, an artsy-fartsy film, definitely.
But with having such that wide berth of of films that of underrated films that you love and you go back to, that just tells me like you just love movies. You love this art form. You love this. That still speaks so much to who you are.
Thank you.
I think that's neat.
Thank you.
I think that hits on something too of like how I view it in a sense that there's like an openness to trying film. Like it comes from a passion and an interest in the just the film industry and the movie making business. But it's also like, I know for many people they wait till the typical routine for them is like, okay, the weekend's here, what movies are out, what's got the highest rating, I will see that. And that's usually the benchmark and rubric. Commonly, I think even it's instilled for me from my folks. They're like, we want to pay money to see something. We kind of know what we're going to get, or it's been recommended. I think I veered more in the direction of, and I think it's described as me to a degree, is just that openness of experimentation. Not everything needs to hit with a film. If the concepts are there, if the emotions are there in some way or shape or form, it just pulls something at me of like, oh, was what the artist was trying to do. And I see that with games, I see that with films of, it's a process for them. Maybe it wasn't their best film, but they go on and take those notes and expand on it. You look at that with like the Ghibli films, and you see over time he's refining his work with any renowned artist, and then you see some of those earlier works, you're more open to it and you're flexible. For me, I remember seeing Repo Man with Jude Law, I believe, and there was another film in the similar vein of like, is this a weird idea? Or In Time, that was the other one with Justin Timberlake. And both of those, like, I definitely like, I knew it didn't hit the mark. It wasn't necessarily the most successful film, or maybe not have been the best, but the ideas were interesting. And I'm like, oh, I like that they're thinking about these things. And I think that would somewhat describe to me what I kind of look for.
Now, Thomas, I'm going to bring this one over to you. JPG, it's coming your way, though.
Sure.
No pressure.
Why is it important for an underrated film to stay underrated?
I don't know if it is important for it to stay underrated, but I think it is important for it to be celebrated and to be discussed. I think, in the vein of what these guys were talking about, it's like, I felt like I had such a dude bro perception of movies before I started the podcast, and just wanted to talk about Marvel and all this stuff. And I think, as the pandemic was going on, and I was just kind of wanted to branch out and explore, and see. And I think there's just this embarrassment of riches that don't get seen. And there's amazing stories, and even if, like what these guys were saying, even if you don't love every detail, there's certain things you can appreciate, I feel like, about most movies. And I think for me, like, being able to share that is so important, and to share, like, the hard work that goes in. And yeah, I know you didn't like the plot, but look at what this actor is doing, or look at the way this shot, look at the way they've lined it up. I mean, it's so beautiful. And as somebody who's, like, not necessarily like a big reader, like I love comic books, but like something about movies really speaks to me, and I don't know, it's something I just want to share.
Yeah. I wanted to connect a little bit to an idea that you had, and for me, I think it's important for a film sometimes to stay underrated, because it kind of keeps the integrity of the film itself. And I think it also teaches the viewer how to defend a film critically without using popularity as its crutch, right? Because so many times, I mean, Derick and I have spent hours talking about Speed Racer. I'm really sorry to bring this back up. But I love the idea that this might not be, oh, well, it wasn't popular, so why would I want to see it? Or, oh, it didn't make this much money, so why should you tell me to see it? And I think it teaches a fan how to critically defend the things that they love, which, I mean, I'm sure a lot of you in the audience feel this as well. Sometimes a lot of the arguments that you're experiencing don't have that criticality to it. And so, yeah, so I think it challenges us to make sure that we know not just that we love the film, but why we love the film.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I got an example. We just reviewed The Acolyte, one of our shows, and like half the sorry if you like it, I'm just telling you the comments. Comments were like, this show's trash. You're like, that's not a good argument for like, why you shouldn't like this show.
It's bad because I didn't like it. And it's like those two aren't equivalent.
Right, exactly.
JPG just did that episode too. We did an Acolyte one.
Sorry.
I was there.
I just had a few clips go viral about like vehemently defending The Acolyte, and I get it, like, people, but to get to stand there and like, okay, at least I have reasoning, right? At least I didn't come here to be like, oh, it's great. End conversation.
Well,
like
So dope, bro.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point, JPG, is that like the joy of the movie itself is one aspect of, I think, why many of us love movies on this stage, but also, and I'm sure many feel this way, when you go to see a movie at home or you're at the theater, you come out and you want to talk about it with someone. In that conversation, you want it to be enjoyable. You want, even if you disagree, I feel like you don't want to just turn it into reductive, just, I hate it because I hate it, or I like it because I like it. It's like, well, why? What about it spoke to you? What about it didn't? And that engagement of conversation, I think we are losing that. And that, what to your point of like, keep that going to some degree is important. because it keeps us of like attentive to what does speak to us and how we can communicate that.
Yeah, film is a singular experience that builds a community through communication, right? So like it's this
That was
medium
like Sun Tzu.
Seriously, I was like, wow.
That's why I wear the suit and tie. No, but it's the idea that like you are experiencing this just in your own head by yourself, but the only thing that grows the community at large is to enjoy it and to talk about it with the people who both enjoy it with you and the people who challenge those expectations that you have for those films, right?
Yeah.
So singular experience, but then like that's how we build the community.
Well said.
Now, how much would you guys say is nostalgia impacting your connection to an underrated film?
I think it definitely plays a part. You know, like there's this phrase I heard recently, which is like, "Was it great or were you 8?" And so, like, that's something I think about there, because, you know, there's certain movies that are like childhood classics that among millennials, which like some of them I watched and as a kid, and like actually like let me defend Hook, and some of them are.
That's what I was thinking.
Wait, who's
That's
challenging
the movie,
Hook?
that's the
By the
movie
way.
I was thinking
Sure.
of, though.
I'm sorry, I got mad about people not liking Hook.
And on the other hand, there's other movies that I didn't watch until like my late 20s, and I won't name them because this is about positive. I'm trying to bring up films, but then I'm like, did we watch the same movie? Because I didn't see it until later on. So I think, you know, nostalgia definitely plays a part to it. So I think we really have to do our best to kind of look at things with a critical eye, because, you know, I'm not a kid anymore, but I still think that a movie that is the next episode of Underrated, it's going to come out Monday. Me and JPG talked about The Phantom, which was a big movie for me as a kid, and it is sometimes hard to be objective, but I think that sometimes critics and people try to put too much objectivity into the review, because your subjective experience, whether or not it is nostalgia driven or whatever, is still important. Movies are like, your experience is going to be subjective, no matter if you're a critic or you're just a fan or whatever. So that all plays a part, and I think it's important to be aware of it, but I don't think you necessarily need to dismiss those feelings out of hand.
Yeah, it's about figuring out that separation, you know, of not completely shunning it, I have to completely shun this area of subjectivity and this lens through which I first absorbed and connected with this story and this film, but acknowledging like that's a thing that is going to inherently color my view of this film, you know, and color the way that, and just acknowledging that while still engaging with it, you know, it's not a but, it's an and, you know, something to be included in the conversation.
So you did improv, clearly.
Yeah. Did it give away the theater kid energy? No? Anyone?
Yes, and.
I think it's just like a discovery of yourself. It's like, yeah, are you being honest with yourself? What are the reasons you enjoyed it? What, you know, when you're thinking about them, whether critically or not, where does it come from? Does it come from memories that you grew up with? Did you watch a certain movie when you were going through a certain part of your life, and is that why it's imprinted? For me, like Heavyweights was a movie I grew up with as a kid. I had a lot of just self-conscious issues with weight in an earlier age, and it was stemming from a lot of negative thoughts. And that movie, it was a big part in Weird Al's "I'm Fat" song, both bringing to some levity to it and making me think of it in a not so negative way in some fashions. And both of those things I still hold to this day, but I know why I'm holding on to them, regardless of the criticality of it. And so it's something that I'm conscious of, I'm not shying away from, but at the same time, I can separate it to some degree, as you were saying also.
Yeah.
I mean, Heavyweights is a solid film, though. Just putting that out there. Now, how would you guys say a film is affected when it goes from underrated to mainstream? And I would say, you know, for me, being a Broadway girly, Rocky Horror Picture is like the perfect example of that, as it became a huge cult classic that people go to shows all the time. So how would you say films are affected in that way when they go from underrated to mainstream?
It's kind of that, it was a conversation that, you know, I was having earlier about like, what is the difference between a film that's just underrated to being a cult like a cult film, you know? And I think it kind of has to do, again, as we touched on earlier, of like when you're really passionate about a film, an underrated film, and you talk to someone about it and you're like, this film, I love it so much, and they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about, you know, versus, you know, with like cult classics with like Rocky Horror, where you're like, yeah, Rocky Horror is great, and there's been so much fandom that has grown around it. There's such a devoted community around this film that, like, even if they haven't seen it themselves, even if they've never been to a midnight showing of Rocky Horror, can't recommend it enough, they've at least are aware of it. It's in the cultural consciousness, you know? It has a sizable impact because of just the community that's congregated around it, you know?
I did want to drive a point a little bit stronger as well too, because Rocky Horror was actually my example for this question as well. And it's the idea that it wasn't the studios that drove the zeitgeist for it, right? It was fans.
Yeah.
It was fans and fans alone that were like, no, I want to see this at a very specific time frame in the middle of the night in order to celebrate myself and the others around me in a way that makes me feel safe, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, with Rocky Horror, it's the LGBTQ plus anthem at one point, and it was one of the only times where somebody, a part of that culture, could meet up and feel safe, right? And if it weren't for fan voices help it get from underrated to a cult following, as opposed to the general audience helps it get from being underrated to like mass appeal mainstream, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's where the drive is. But I love that we're just on the same page on that.
I
one,
got
so.
you.
The concern I'd say I have in some degree is when it becomes mainstream, there's often this thought, and I think it typically happens, is when the community builds around a film. I'll take Point Break, for instance. I love that film. I think there's this experience that used to be, or might still be, at the beach, where they have fans come in and play the part of Keanu, and they give him cue cards and everything, and it's had this huge following. They went ahead and did a remake of it, and that remake, you know, whenever a movie gets a remake, there's always a question of, does this keep the authenticity of the film? Does this uphold the things that we loved about the original?
Yeah.
To some degree, I think that's always like a dance, like, to be had, but I think, to me, what I see as a through line, as a positive, is that as it evolves into that mainstream, you know, tier in some fashion, in the larger scope, is if anything, for those that find anything interesting of it, they're drawn to the original. They're like, where did this come from? What was it a remake of? And they seek that out, and they may see what that underrated kind of, where the community initially started and what drove that passion. And, you know, we may get fans there, but if the remake finds its own fans, that's another plus, but it doesn't always have the case. But
the other example that I would give is Wet Hot American Summer, which is a movie when it came out, people despised. Like, it's kind of shocking to like look back and see that it has like a 37% on Rotten Tomatoes. I don't think it did very well at the box office. But like over the years, that being played on Comedy Central over and over and over, it was a movie that I initially was like, okay, maybe I'll cover this on underrated. And I was like, I can't. It's not underrated anymore. It has crossed the threshold to cult classic and maybe even to just kind of just a popular movie. And by doing that, it got its Netflix prequel series, it's got its next Netflix sequel series, which are great because the people in that show went on to be like huge A-list movie stars and like some of the funniest people in the world. And while at the time, critics and a lot of audiences missed it, and like I remember even Roger Ebert wrote this really sassy review set to the tune of "Hello Mother, Hello Father." It's pretty bad. But because like over the years, like Comedy Central and all these things propelling that movie into like the cultural zeitgeist, other audiences were able to discover it, and then now the sequel series has like a 97% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it's exactly the same comedy, most of the same stars and everything. Nothing has really changed other than the public perception of these two products, which are very, very similar.
Yeah, and I think the topic of accessibility of certain films absolutely plays into it crossing that threshold, whether like into the cultural consciousness, into that mainstream. You know, one of my favorite films that I came across in the last year is All That Jazz, Bob Fosse. Not available on any streaming services. I literally had to order a copy from the Criterion Collection. I'm glad I did, but it was something where I would, if like I couldn't experience the film any other way. And that's something where that film is critically lauded. It won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, but it's something where when I talk to people about it, like that film, I know people say it a lot of like, this thing changed my brain chemistry. This one literally did. I can't emphasize it enough. But I've tried to, again, have that conversation about like, have you seen this film? And no one has, because it's not available anywhere,
Yeah.
And so that the ability to access it easily and interact with it frequently, I think definitely has an impact on the underrated status.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
I was just saying, yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, like the availability, because obviously I just talked about Wet Hot American Summer. Michael Showalter also did another movie called The Baxter, which had a lot of people break out: Michelle Williams, Paul Rudd, and that movie is not available anywhere. It's not even, the DVD's not even in print anywhere. You can't stream it, you can't rent it, you can't anything, and people don't like that movie. It's very similar comedy, very similar stuff to Wet Hot American Summer. One blew up, one didn't, and I think the reason is availability. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Thomas.
No, I mean, I was just going to add on to that. I think it can't be understated, Netflix and streaming and all these things has really changed the way movies go from underrated to all of a sudden being popular. It's like, all jokes aside with Madam Web, bombed everywhere, right? Didn't make a ton of money. One of the most watched shows on Netflix. So it's like, it's really kind of changed, I think, the way people look at movies. It's obviously changed the box office, but I think it really does change people's perception, because maybe they're more willing to give it a chance because they're just going to be at home. They're going to be in their PJs. I'll put this on, and I know I do that constantly now.
Yeah, you text your friend, I'm bored. Do you have anything, that you'd recommend on Netflix? It has completely changed the conversation and the way that that status is either like achieved or like maintained.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
JPG, really fast, educator over there. Can you break down a little bit of the difference with a mainstream film versus a cult classic film?
Well, I'd mentioned this before, right? Like, I believe that cult followings are fan-driven, while mainstream is general audience-driven, right? My best example of a cult following would be Big Trouble in Little China. Mostly, and although I look at this in an objective sort of way, I also look at it very subjectively, because as an Asian American, seeing that film and Kurt Russell understood that he was not the hero of that film. He was there to be laughed at and to push Asian protagonists. And if you watch that film again, you will be shocked to see how little he does in order to help the plot at all. To have somebody so big, I mean, Kurt Russell in the 80s, right? To have somebody so big use his platform in order to highlight an Asian American story was insane to me. And in the cult following of it, I think more and more people are starting to appreciate not just how much the fans love it, but what the actors and actresses did in those films in order to push it to those statuses, right? So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, which brings me to my next, you're just segueing is perfect for me. When we're talking about these films, how much of what people learn behind the scenes do you think impacts a shift from an underrated film into cult classic or mainstream? And my example for that is Better Off Dead, where everybody knew that John Cusack did not like that movie, and somehow that built a huge following around it.
For me, I think the trivia section on IMDb is my most clicked on button in all of the internet. Mostly because I think when it comes to like tidbits and trivia, if I know more about it, I enjoy the film more, right? We get this inside look into something that was made by hundreds of people. It was a labor of love. And I would argue that almost every film is a labor of love. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad. Somebody worked really hard on that team in order to get it out there. Right? And so getting to know more pieces of what happened in the background makes me enjoy it more, or at the very least, makes me want to check out the film.
Yeah, it makes you appreciate the kind of effort and the artistry that was put into it, and you say hundreds of hours, and that is very true. As someone who works in post-production, is on that side of putting forth all that energy into it, I cut dialogue in ADR, and I will get through, in one day of work, one 10-hour day, I will get through about 6 minutes worth of dialogue.
I gotta
for
ask.
one. Yeah.
Okay, so like working in that sort of industry, okay, what's the fastest you've ever gotten done with cutting an ADR and all that?
At what level of quality? Because that
No, we just assume you're perfect the whole time, Austin. Don't worry.
the fastest I've ever gone is I think the max I can go is like 10 minutes a day. But again, there's so much energy that needs to be put forth in order to get it to that quality. So many people think, and this is one of the reasons why I'm so grateful for the platform I have on TikTok to even bring attention to one tiny little area of filmmaking is like that, like.
I love the passion that is like seething through you right
I'm
now.
trying to distill it down because it's something where, people think that films just happen. They just exist because all you do is you sit down and it's presented to you as the finished product.
Yeah, my mom didn't know what a screenwriter was. She didn't
Yeah.
understand that it was a thing that existed.
Oh yeah, no. Most people have no idea when I explain. Like I remember I met someone who, when I was in college, and I explained like, I'm pursuing post-production sound, and he was like, what is that? He thought like, I was like, oh yeah, like 90 to 95% of what you hear in a film is added after the fact. He had no idea that was the case, And so, like getting to, see and appreciate all of that, all of the decisions, all of the little, the little choices that informed the storytelling a bit more, that made the world of the film a little richer, that pulled you into it a little bit more, and understanding the amount of effort and the amount of thought and the amount of care that went into making that film happen, I feel like can only inherently elevate your appreciation of the film itself.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. Even at such a baseline level, somebody who's on the outside looking in, it's like even for shows or movies I don't like, if I watch the behind the scenes, the making of, it's impossible for me not to appreciate it.
Yeah.
Because it's so painstaking and every detail, and that's someone's job and they care about it.
Yeah.
And so there's a ton of movies. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that, but there's a lot of movies I've seen where I'm like, I don't love this, but I watch the behind the scenes. Like I do actually love this movie now, but my wife's a big Twilight fan.
Yeah.
So we watched the last movie, whatever, Breaking Dawn Part 2. And then, the movie's 2 hours, but then we watched the behind the scenes for like 6 hours. And I was like, this is incredible. Like, they're in a melting hot studio and like, they're not all pale white and the makeup's coming off. I'm like, oh my God. So I think for me, it's impossible not to appreciate it and thus also go back and watch it and like it more.
And I will add something that I think that there was like a golden age between like probably like around 2005 and maybe like 2015, so like 10 years, where DVD extras were just everywhere.
We need to bring
The
them back.
best.
Right,
We
yeah.
need to bring them back.
It was the Wild West.
It was, and
right? Like everybody was just saying whatever
There's
they
gold,
wanted
right.
on it.
Look up the Superbad
Oh
cut
my God,
with Michael
yes.
Cera dancing for like 2 hours just for the intro, like before
And
you even click on it.
I'll mention an episode that I did with Kurosh, Kingdom of Heaven, where that's an interesting one because that's a movie where the movie comes out, people have a tepid response, but because of like the DVD extras and all that stuff, we discover like, oh, there's actually this alternate cut, and that was right around when DVDs and Blu-rays and all that stuff were becoming like prevalent, and like the way that people would watch movies at home rather than like VHS tapes or just catching it on TV. And because of that, we got like this other alternate version, and I watched in preparation for that episode like all the behind the scenes stuff that was Ridley was doing, and that's a movie I liked, and now it's a movie that I absolutely love.
Yeah, you can, by interacting with that behind the scenes stuff and seeing the actual, you connect even more with the humans who created it. It adds that extra layer of humanity on top of it, that can only, help you connect with all of it more.
Yeah,
I think to a degree of that behind the scenes and seeing some of that, it's for me it was very much a Wild West in that there was the DVDs with the behind the scenes, but there was also, even to a lighter degree, movies used to, instead of having like teasers for another thing or for a future thing, it was bloopers. I always remember,
Yes.
like for instance, Rush Hour. I remember seeing bloopers at the end of the movie and looking forward to outtakes of Rumble in the Bronx.
Gefilte
And-
fish.
Yeah, some of those quotable like is just from the bloopers of it, and that gave me an inside kind of scoop on like the stunts that Jackie Chan's doing here, or the goofy moments in between all the giggling that I appreciate. And I was like, oh, there's something more here. And to what you guys are saying is, we're not. I think some of the way the industry has shifted has changed the way in which we can access that. It's no longer along with these things as available when we would get a DVD or when you would rent a movie. Now the streaming is just the film, and where do you get it? Is it on YouTube? Is it via a behind the scenes, like a special event of some sort where you could get it? It's harder to find, I think, in some ways, and that's taken away, I think, to some degree of what we grew up with and we've seen and we love about it. And so I want to see that in some way, shape, or form come back to, whether it be their own, like, I think if they could even put it in the space of, which they have to some degree, of the making of this film and give it a polished kind of like, hey, we want to go into and show you all the steps of this film, or the special editions. I think those are worthwhile and they help to give a film that appreciation.
So we are at the last 5 minutes, so I'm going to have each of you just do a quick little where everybody can find you and what movies you did on the Underrated podcast. So you will list them all out. And since we started at JPG last time, we'll start at Kurosh this time and work our way back that way.
Sounds good. You guys can find me on YouTube at youtube.com/@KujoPrime. I have my show, The KJP Show, talking about indie games and talking with indie developers. I'm on all other platforms for social media. And the movies I've talked with Derick are Kingdom of Heaven, Extended Edition, Morbius, it's Morbin time, and Underdogs was a subset, but it was Challengers. We also spoke about that.
You can find me pretty much on all social media at aok.wave. Again, if you want to hear me ramble even more about sound and, kind of peel back that curtain, find me on TikTok there. And I have been on Underrated twice before. Again, first talk about Inside Llewyn Davis, and then to also talk about Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story. For some reason, the theme is movies that overtly reference the career of Bob Dylan. So we got to continue that somehow.
Yeah, got to complete the trilogy. So Underrated Movie Podcast everywhere, obviously on all the apps where you would listen to podcasts. It's also on YouTube and all the social media. If you just look up Underrated Movie Podcast, it should come up. I can't list all of the movies that I've done on Underrated because it's about 150. It would take a lot of time. But yeah, check out Underrated Movie Podcast everywhere if you liked any of the stuff I had to say. It's basically what this panel was, but about a specific movie every time.
Right on. Thomas Craig, and if you want to check us out, it's at Joystick Show. If you want a one-stop shop for all things pop culture and every week, that might be the place to do it. If you hate us, sorry. And then we also got Challenge Accepted, which, again, and if you guys got challenges and you want to challenge us to whatever movie, if you think there's a movie that's underrated and we haven't covered it, I'd love to get your opinion on it. We're taking suggestions right now. But yeah, that's at Challenge Accepted Live, and both of those are on every podcast platform, social media.
And what movies have you done on Underrated?
I did Sound of Metal. That one, I probably cried twice on that episode.
That
So that was emotional. What
was a good
else?
episode.
X-Men '97.
Yeah, that was on the bonus. I should say I also do, because we're at Comic-Con, I do another podcast infrequently about the MCU called Infinity Stones and Dragon Bones. So if you want to check that out, that's what Morbius was on.
Okay.
Derick's been on our show talking about Shogun. I don't know, we've been on each other's show so many times, I can't even listen to all, I'm sorry.
I run a pop culture consultancy firm called Intermyth that helps marginalized communities launch products in the content creation space. You can check us out at intermyth_. What else? I'm a TTRPG performer, a tabletop RPG performer, and I'm a voice on a bunch of different shows. I was just a host on Tabletop News, talking about all things board games, card games, and tabletop RPG-related news. I'm on the Welcome Party with Alix. That's your exclusive invitation to pop culture. That's every Monday night on Twitch at 7:30 p.m. Pacific. And we have two panels tonight, actually. So I'm doing a seminar on improving your ability to do public speaking in the content creation space. That's at 7:00 in the San Diego Convention Center. And then right after that, the Welcome Party actually has their own panel where I'm going to be torturing a bunch of people with pop culture trivia related English and math questions.
The panelists get tortured, not the audience. It's great for the audience. You'll love it. You'll love it.
Also torture the panelists. So don't worry. So that's 7:00 and 8:00
Do you remember what room? Is it 23 ABC, I believe?
I can pull it up.
Okay.
And then what episodes were you on with Derick?
Oh, okay. I'm about to be on the Phantom for this one. I know I've been on one more.
You were on The Count of Monte Cristo.
The Count
2002
of
one.
Monte Cristo. I love this film so much. And nobody understands because Derick and I know each other because we were studying to be English teachers together, and so that was both a book and a film that we both felt were underrated.
Yep.
And I will be on the Spice World episode, which we are going to be filming after Comic-Con. Too much going on before, but we will be doing Spice World. I'm Alix Catherine. Again, you can find me as part of the Welcome Party, twitch.tv/Perception Studio. And you can find my social medias at AlixyGalaxy, ALIXYGALIXY. And the panel rooms tonight will be 23 ABC.
Yes,
for all
7
of them.
o'clock and 8 o'clock if you want to come and learn and then come and laugh at
Make
people
fun of
for
us.
not knowing trivia.
And
need
can we get a
both.
round of applause for these panelists, please?
Also, to Yvette and Elvira in the back, thank you so much. Programming from San Diego Comic-Con.
Thank you.
And I hope you guys all enjoy the rest of your con and have a great weekend.
Hi, everybody.